Hi, kindergarten students, it's Mrs. Belatash, and I hope you have had a good time learning about all these different animals. We looked at snails. I love snails. I think they're amazing animals. We looked at worms. Worms are master recyclers. They help turn dead plants back into good soil so that new plants can grow. Then we looked at isopods, roly-polies, and we saw how they can roll into a ball and protect themselves. We saw how they can move around, how they can use their little antennae to observe the world. So today, we're going to have a race. We are going to observe how the snails, the worms, and the isopods move on a racetrack. Now, of course, the snails, worms, and isopods don't know they're racing. But it's fun to put them on the racetrack and see what happens. Pay attention to these things when you're watching your snails race, when you're watching the worms stretch and move, when you're watching the isopods. Do they only go forward, or do they sometimes go backwards? Can they turn? What parts of their body are they using to move? Different animals have different parts. Snails use their big muscle foot, but fish use their tail and fins. So pay attention to how the snails, the worms, and the isopods all move. We are going to have a race, and we're going to see how these snails move. Can they move backwards? Can they move sideways? How do these snails move? Ooh, I see one is taking off, moving forward. Oh, it has slime. These snails are moving on a slime trail. I see the snail's eye stalks on its tentacles. I wonder what would happen if I put some lettuce near the snail. So I want you guys to put your snails on a racetrack. See how the snails move. Do they move fast or do they move slow? Do they move forward? Do they move backwards? Really observe how the snails move. Next, get some worms and put them on the racetrack. Watch how the worms move. Look at them stretching and moving with their bodies. Look at these worms stretching. Remember, the worm is just a lot of muscle segments. Do you remember the lines on the worm? Those are the segments. And they stretch and move. Can the worms go forward and backward? Let's see. I'm going to touch this end of the worm. I'm going to see what happens. Come on, little worm. Can you go backwards and forwards? I see that the worms can go both backwards and forwards. Did the snails go backwards and forwards? Have fun racing your worms. Okay, now we're going to have an isopod race, and this little guy over here is already winning. This isopod is moving so fast. Look at them. How are they moving? What do they use to move? I see they have legs. The worms didn't have legs, and the snail didn't have legs. They had muscles. But this isopod, all of these isopods have legs. Oh, these are upside down and they're trying to turn over. Put your isopods on your racetrack and see how they move. I hope you guys had fun racing your snails, your worms, and your isopods. Again, they don't know that they're racing, but it's fun anyway. Let's get out your science notebook and turn to the page number 14. How do isopods move? Before we draw the picture, I want us to write 3 sentences. I know it's a lot, but I want us to write about how isopods move, how snails move, and how worms move. I wrote, isopods walk with legs. Remember, they have so many legs. They have 7 legs on one side and 7 legs on the other. Then I wrote, snails use their muscle foot. So snails don't have legs. They have just one big muscle foot. Then I wrote, worms stretch and contract. And they also have muscles, don't they? Now, I'm going to draw a picture of an isopod. First, I drew an oval. Then I drew some lines. Those lines are the joints in the shell of the isopod. Then I drew the antennae and 2 little eyes. Now I want to focus on how the isopod moves, and I'm going to add 7 legs on each side. And there are the legs for the isopod. The isopod uses its legs to move. Next, I'm going to draw the snail. I drew a spiral for the shell. I drew a long, skinny oval for the foot, the muscle foot for the snail. I drew 2 long tentacles with the eye stalks at the end and 2 short tentacles. This snail moves with its big muscly foot, and it also leaves a layer of slime behind. Now I'm going to draw the worm. The worm is a long, skinny oval. The lines are the segments on the worm. Now, I'm not adding any eyes because the worm doesn't have any eyes. I'm not adding any other details because worms are a pretty simple animal. You guys have done a terrific job learning about how animals move. Each animal has its own special way for moving. Fish move through the water with their tails and their fins. Snails use their strong muscle foot. The isopods use their jointed legs. Next week, we are going to make a habitat for the snails, the worms, and the isopods to live together.